little red box up here that says live as soon as we're live. We're live.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this week's customer update and Q&A. I am Patrick O'Riordan, Interim Director of the Department of Building Inspection. As you know, our building at 1660 Mission Street is closed to the public, and we remain closed for the foreseeable future. We continue to serve our customers by phone and email and continue to ensure building safety through our inspection and permit services. I understand how frustrating it is for so many of you right now because you can't walk into our building and talk to somebody in person about the status of your permit application. You can walk up to the counter with your permit application and walk out the same day with a permit and start work the next day. And that impacts your ability to work and your ability to serve your customers. Before I came to DBI, I was a contractor, and I remember what it feels like to wait for a permit and to be able to start a job. So I want you to know that as we bring this system online and work out workflow and other issues, we are always mindful of what it means to all of you. You want to work, we want to get you back to work and we want to get you back to work as soon as we can. We have accomplished a lot over the last 2 months, but we still have a ways to go. You have been patient, and we are grateful for your patience and understanding. Just know that we are working with a sense of urgency, and we are exploring additional options to facilitate review and issuance of all of your submittals. Melissa will provide you with more details about the status of pending permits and what's being issued right now. But know that we are issuing more permits now and we are getting faster and better at the electronic system. This month we issued about 450 permits. It isn't as fast as we'd like, and it isn't close to what we're doing before the shelter in place, but we are making real progress. I expect we'll continue to increase the number of permits issued per week. With that said, I will hand you over to Melissa to provide a more detailed update. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our customer update and Q&A. Hold on, I'm trying to make sure the slides are going. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and give some updates today. The first updates I'm going to give are around the citywide health context and kind of where do we find ourselves at. Because I know at the last update that we had, there was a lot of questions about reopening the building and when were we going to come back online and should people be waiting to submit their over-the-counter permits before they actually move them forward through the digital system. And, at that time we told you that we weren't exactly sure, but it was looking like it was going to be a while before we were going to be able to reopen to the public. And I have some more information on that to share today. Another thing I would say is, when I think about where we're at with this process, and I agree with Patrick, so much has happened over the past 2 months, and I really am proud of all the work that we've done. But I have to agree with Patrick that, a lot of people are reaching out. I know there's frustration, and I'm also really involved in the city's economic recovery task force work. And I see the numbers and the data on job losses and how impactful COVID-19 is on our economy. So I really do, I think all of us feel the urgency and the need to move all this forward as fast as we can. And looking at the citywide health context and kind of thinking about and weighing all those things. I just want everyone to know how seriously we're taking all of this. And then I'll give some permit updates on kind of where we're at with the numbers and what we're seeing and where we're going. And then, of course, just like every other week, we will be sure to open up for Q&A at the end. So on health context, we kind of started talking about this lightly a couple of weeks ago because I was seeing the conversation go this way, but it really wasn't clear yet. But now we've really heard from our Public Health Director, Grant Colfax. He shared that minimizing movement of people moving around the city kind of remains critical to limiting the spread of the infection. And this means continuing to minimize the number of employees that are at work sites and the extent to which there's in-person transactions required. And so when we think about this disease and we think about the risk of this disease, this is kind of what we understand from the public health officials on what are more and less risky activities. And for anybody I know there's a couple people on the call who are actually on the Economic Recovery Task Force. So this slide will look very familiar to you because we showed it in our last task force meeting. So activities for COVID-19 that are more risky are prolonged contact, close physical contact, concentrations of people in close spaces with poor ventilation, these mobility numbers, so large numbers of employees or customers moving around, shared surfaces, touching different surfaces and different items between people. And I'm just going to stop there because those are the ones I bolded, because as you can see, permit center kind of yes, yes, yes on all of those items. So when we think about whether or not it's safe to reopen the permit center to the public, this is really what's weighing on our mind. And the permit center has a lot of indoor contact in close physical space with a high concentration of people. So it just doesn't seem like it's a good candidate to move forward and be reopened soon. Whereas, short time exposure, no physical contact, low concentration, and outdoors are areas where it is safer to move forward faster. And so you guys will probably have seen in the news, yesterday the city issued a safe reopening plan with various phases. And across those various phases, basically we can move from phase to phase only if our health indicators are looking good. So for example, there's indoor retail, outdoor dining are two of the big items that are currently slated to move forward on June 15th. But we will only be able to do that if we don't see a large spread of disease, because what we need to avoid is our hospitals being overrun, large spreads of disease with our constituents and other things. So this is really this point that Director Colfax is making around the mobility. And another piece of that puzzle that was issued yesterday was around office work. So the city is really recommending that for the foreseeable future, as many people who can still have a positive economic benefit, but telework would continue to do so for the foreseeable future, and only really go into the office for necessary operations. And I know that the Office of Economic and Workforce Development is going to be working through industry-specific guidance around office and what that could mean in the coming weeks and months soon. But at least the kind of takeaway high level was telework as much and as frequently as possible. And simultaneously, the City Administrator's Office, which is coordinating overall reopening for city services, issued a memo, and really the framework of that memo is not about kind of reopening your department, but really thinking about how we can shift our critical government services away from being paper-based and in-person, and moving them as much as possible to staff working from home and telecommuting, as well as providing remote services as much as possible. And the recommendation for city staff in that memo is to continue to provide service remotely through the next fiscal year, which is basically, at a minimum, which is a whole year from now, because our fiscal year starts July 1. So, when I take all of that, departments can come forward with a plan on reopening, but that plan needs to be specific to their location. It needs to be approved by the city administrator's office, but also by the health officer. And so really it needs to have a very high level of scrutiny on safety, and there's going to be a lot of requirements around social distancing and masking and other things. So just all of this is to say, when we think about this, the permit center just doesn't seem likely to open soon, and this is much more information than I had 2 weeks ago, so I wanted to share that with everyone. Additionally, the city administrator is asking city departments that are very paper-based to start working with digital services and to just take as many of their services digital in the coming months as they can. So in this area, I'm happy to say that because we had started electronic plan review, we do have somewhat of a head start here, right? We're not just, we haven't been closed with everyone furloughed for the last 2 months. And now, we are engaging digital services and thinking about how to move forward and reopen, which is really, what some other departments, and I think what would have been the alternative had we not started to move digital. So because of that, I feel we've done a lot of work over the last 2 months, and I think we have a head start on some other city services that are now kind of shifting to figure out how to reopen or move their services digitally. But, as Patrick has alluded to, and as we've been saying in all of these meetings, we still have a long way to go. So I know what everyone wants to know. You want to know, when are we going to be back to pre-COVID-19 levels of issuing permits? And, I would love to be able to give you the answer to that, but I don't know that, because what we're doing is taking a system that has been digital for 100+ years with hundreds of staff across a dozen departments and really 6 to 7 key departments, and taking them digital and implementing all of these workflows in the middle of a health pandemic when we have staff that are on leave and performing disaster service work, as we kind of talked about in all the other meetings. So these are just really unprecedented times. And as I said, all of us feel the weight of how important our work is to supporting people's livelihoods and feeding their families and the economy, and we take it very seriously. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give you some of the updates on the numbers. So some staff are starting to return from those disaster service worker assignments and get trained. So every day, I'd say in the last couple of weeks, I've seen at least a new face at 1660 Mission a day, and getting those staff back on and getting them trained. But there are still a lot of staff that are doing disaster service assignments all over the city in food pantries, feeding homeless people, and really just kind of supporting the overall city's effort. So everyone that works for the city as a city employee is a disaster service worker. And even though permits are, back online and construction is online, when there's disease and health-related response efforts that we need to deploy staff to, we do have to answer that call. And so the planning department, Department of Building Inspection, many of our permit departments have been sending dozens of staff to do these assignments over the past few weeks, and I do see that continuing into the foreseeable future. Additionally, we have a lot of staff out on leave. So as you guys are all dealing with having children home and trying to work while having children home, our staff have that issue as well. And so I'm happy to say that in the reopening plan, we have seen that childcare is allowed starting June 1st, and June 15th, summer camps are coming back on board, at least for people who live in San Francisco. I think it's another question whether or not everyone decides from a risk perspective that they would like to send their children back to schools and camps, but that is an option, at least for me personally, with my two children, that I'm very much looking forward to having my children go to school again. And it's going to be done in safe ways with much smaller groups, but that's just something that's been having a big impact on our staff's ability to do work as well. So as Patrick alluded to, permit issuance, these are the numbers that we have as to date, as of yesterday. So 0 permits were issued at the second half of March, as we discussed last time. We really, at that point, staff were really furloughed for the most part, especially at the Department of Building Inspection. We were kind of taking stock of what this disease meant and where we were going and what should we do. April is really, there was about 50 permits issued. That was really about starting to think through the processes and how can we bring this process back online, and how can we get our workflow going. And then this month of May, we've had about 450 permits that have been issued, but the majority of those permits have been no plans permits. And the average daily permit issuance prior to COVID, just to give some sort of perspective, was about 100 per day. And right now, we're probably at about 25% capacity of that from what I've seen in the last few weeks. So we're definitely still way down capacity of where we were at pre-COVID-19. And so we had a bunch of permits that came in pre-May 18th. So about 1,150 submissions. So this isn't permits, because there was a lot of things within those submissions where there was duplicates, or people submitted things, but then because we kind of noticed that we decided it would be faster for certain permits to go paper, and so we asked people to go back and do paper for things that would be faster. A bunch of those submissions were now going to be issued in paper. And then on the duplicates, we did have a lot of things that came in that didn't have Form 348s or needed to be resubmitted and were resubmitted. So of these items, and it was a bit of a process to go through these, because the forms themselves weren't digital yet, as you all know. They were fillable PDF forms. And so the Permit Center team went line by line on every single one of these. They have gone through all of them now and sent over them to the Department of Building Inspection where they needed to be, or stopped looking at them if they were going to be finished off in paper. And the Department of Building Inspection, within a few weeks now, has been working on picking those up, assigning them to support staff. And really, in the last few weeks, we had them start prioritizing the smaller scope permits and moving those through. And so for the over-the-counter and the no plans permits, the pre-May 8th have moved through, and they are either in Bluebeam sessions or have been issued if they're the no plans permits that came in prior to May 8th. And there's about 244 open and created Bluebeam sessions that we have in interdepartmental review right now. And just to put some context on that, before COVID hit, we had 3 pilot projects that we had started in mid-February in Bluebeam. And we had initiated 3 sessions in Bluebeam with pilot projects prior to COVID-19 hitting. So just to even be getting in all those permits, getting them into Bluebeam, and now we have hundreds of staff in reviewing those projects, getting trained, working together, and about 179 of those were over the counter and 65 were intake. But I will note that on these pre-May 8th projects, again, it was a very manual process to have to go through these line by line, bring up every single one, look at the form line by line, understand what was missing, what was needed, the customer reach out, and all of those things. So, I think that when I think about these pre-May 8th ones, the alternative, as I mentioned, was really not accepting anything. And I think that wouldn't have been good either. But I do think that things are much more efficient now that we're moving to the post-May 8th world. So of the post-May 8th world, there's been about 1,500 submissions that have come in. Again, within this, there are many duplicates. So there are multiple projects submitted, but I'll get to that in a few minutes when I ask for your assistance on some of the key areas where we could use help. But what I will say about this data now is it's much easier now for us to slice and dice the data because we're asking all of these questions in a digital form. And so I can get that information into Excel, and then I can do pivot tables, and we can actually see at a much higher level and then start sending these permits off down different workflows. And so, for example, we can be more strategic about how we're prioritizing this workload moving forward and how we're prioritizing the staff and how we're splitting up the staff. So this past week or two, we've really been focusing on the no plans permits on the front end of the process. So the staff that are doing that intake and issuance, since there were so many things that had moved through from the pre-May 8th into the Bluebeam sessions. And then on the post-issuance process, we were really focusing on all the things that were in Bluebeam. So I kind of see those as two different areas to think about. So when you think about the workflow, there's all the support staff on the front end that as things are coming in, getting them moving forward. And so a lot of people have been asking me, well, why can't I see everything in PTS? And the answer to that is, you know, a lot of things have moved into PTS that were pre-May 8th, but things post-May 8th have not really moved, haven't, very, very few, except for the over-the-counter and the no plans ones have actually moved into PTS. And this doesn't mean that they don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're lost. It means that we're getting to them and we're trying to prioritize and use staff time strategically and efficiently and be responsive to the volume that we're getting in, right? The systems are all getting off the ground on entirely paper to an entirely digital. And so really, you know, if we could stop the inflow and we just had a certain number, like that would be one thing, but obviously there's still many, many permits coming in as we go. And so to address that, we really are trying to be strategic now moving forward. And I think another really critical thing here is getting the process improvements that we further need on digital. So I've talked about these in the past, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more, but it is so critical to get a permit tracking system and Bluebeam integration so that this work does not have to be manual. Right now, it is people who are receiving these digital submissions, reviewing them, interacting with customers, and then uploading the plans into Bluebeam, typing this information, hand typing into PTS. And so that is why things aren't magically going into PTS immediately, although we would love that, because we agree with all of you that have reached out on this topic that it's really challenging for you to hit submit, receive an email, and then not hear anything. And we understand that. And so I just wanted to explain today why that is, so that you can understand that it doesn't mean that your permits are never going to move, but just kind of where we're focusing our time right now and how we're receiving the data from the customers. So as I mentioned, on the post-May 8th, we were really focused on the no plans permit for the support staff on the front end of the process. Additionally, this week, we did an individual review of all the over-the-counter with plans permits that came in. There was about 620 requests that came in, and about 500 of those are determined to be PTS. So starting next week, we're going to start moving those into PTS and into Bluebeam, similar to how we've already moved the over-the-counter with plans permits pre-May 8th. And then there was another about 120 of those projects that requested over-the-counter, but they actually aren't over-the-counter scope. And so we will be notifying those customers about that. So, and this is a question I get from everyone, you know, what is the status of the permits? When can I start to see pre-COVID-19 timeframes? So I'm gonna walk through the information I have of the way we're now starting to bifurcate the permits. So on the no plans permits, as I mentioned, pre-May 8th, most of those have been issued at this time. Post-May 8th, we're really taking them on a first in, first out, and we've been really focusing on that in the past week. So I'm really hoping that a lot of those either are likely to be issued or will be issued very soon. And then what we'd really like on that work stream is to just put a few staff on that so that those ones can kind of get back to the timeframes that you guys are used to seeing pre-COVID, because they are an easier workflow and because they are an easier scope of work and because they are very high volume. That is why we are trying to do that. And then the next most critical thing, just based on volume, is really these over-the-counter permit with plans. And so the pre-May 8th, as I mentioned, you should see the pre-May 8th ones in PTS, and they all should have Bluebeam project IDs now and be in sessions. And next week, what we're going to do to be responsive to customers' feedback is we're going to start inviting customers into all those sessions the moment that they're created rather than after departments have reviewed. And we're going to do that across all projects. So that's conversations that the staff have been having over the past week to really try to figure out this over-the-counter process and how should it work and how should it look. And permit departments have been bringing back online their over-the-counter processes for their staff, the planning department, the Department of Building Inspection. That all has just started, though, in the last week or two. And so the staff have agreed that it makes sense to let customers come in earlier so that you can monitor the progress in Bluebeam as people are doing the review. So as we move people in and the over-the-counter with plans permits in post-May 8th, we're going to be inviting the customers into those sessions immediately as we invite the staff in. And then, as I said, moving forward, this post-May 8th over-the-counter with plans permits are going to be a huge focus for us. And really, from what I can see and just as I'm watching the staff day in and day out, this process needs integrations of the systems. And so I'm actually going to talk about that for a moment. So as I was mentioning, so right now what's happening is you guys hit submit, and then your permits come in via email to a bucket that the Permit Center team reviews. The Permit Center team does initial quality control and quality assurance assessment, and then they send it off to the Department of Building Inspection after creating a Bluebeam project ID for the projects where that is needed. And then the Permit Tech staff will assign those permits out to their support staff. And then those support staff will take those, and then they will have a lot of customer interaction. So for what I'm seeing, there's probably about 75% of even the over-the-counter permits where there's something going on. It doesn't get to go straight into a session. There's something missing. There's not a signature. And these are things we've talked about in the past. So I know that people are already making improvements on these requests that we've made in past meetings. But just because we're still working through those items that were really manual from the previous process, that is taking up a bunch of time, a lot of that back and forth. And so I think what we're trying to move to and figure out and what we need to move to is when you hit submit, both the plans go automatically into Bluebeam, and then the data that you submit goes automatically into the permit tracking system, so that what our support staff and our Permit Center team staff are doing is they're just reviewing that data rather than having to format it, create things, move things, toggle back and forth, do copying and pasting, printing out and doing hand typing in. Like, all of that stuff is really very slow. And what used to happen before is you were the human, the customer, walking around these plans, and there was data entry and other things, but a lot of that process is now, it just needs to be as seamless as it was in person with customers actually doing the movement, but through our systems. And so that's not where we're at today. And I think it would have been, again, like I said this last time, it would have been very challenging for us to build that whole system over however many months and not accept anything, to wait until that system was all built perfectly. And so I am still comfortable with us, learning as we go, because we wouldn't have actually known all the questions that we needed to ask on the digital forms for the post-May 8th stuff if we hadn't gone live pre-May 8th and kind of seen all the challenges we were having with how manual everything was. That really helped inform what we knew we needed to do on the forms that we took live for the post-May 8th. So with all of that is to say, we do have a lot we need to do on further integrating our systems. And I'm happy to report that Bluebeam integration is possible as of this week. So it became possible this week, digital services working with Bluebeam, working with DBI, and we are going to start testing that next week. And so what that will mean is for all the post-May 8th over-the-counter permits, we're going to start testing those plans moving directly into Bluebeam with much less intervention from staff. And so assuming that goes well, we can start moving those things into Bluebeam quicker and inviting customers in quicker, so that even if those permits aren't getting into PTS as quickly, you will be able to see them going into Bluebeam, and so that will be a faster way for you to know, again, to your feedback about once I hit submit and then I don't hear anything. So that's something we're really hoping to be able to move forward, and you'll be able to monitor those Bluebeam sessions if you are a customer who wants to use Bluebeam. And then on the PTS integration, this is when we were prioritizing for after Bluebeam integration, and we are going to turn to that now full force. The reason we were also not prioritizing that as much is the DBI IT staff are working really hard on getting building permit payments live and are very close on bringing form addendum payments live. So there was just a lot of work going on with them on various items, but now we're going to be fully focusing on PTS integration because we think this is just really critical to getting the system moving quicker. So on the status of some other permit types, so fire-only permits, basically on the entirety of fire-only permits that we've received since we started accepting new projects, including fire-only since May 8th, these have always been kind of moving on a different, faster timeline. The permit center was sending them directly through to fire. 30% of those have been approved, 30% on hold waiting for customer information, and then the remaining ones have come in more frequently, the post-May 8th ones, and so those are also going to start moving along with the rest of the over-the-counter permits this week. Priority and development agreement projects, so there was about 18 projects that were submitted pre-May 8th, and then there's another 102 that have come in post-May 8th where the customer is saying that they're either 100% affordable or development agreement projects, and the staff started this week going through those, and we'll continue reviewing those next week to confirm that that is in fact the case so that those can be moved forward. Another comment I want to make, though, on the previously submitted priority projects, because I've just been monitoring this and watching this over email, and any project that kind of came in prior to electronic plan review where we need to upload the plans is very manual as well. So the staff need to have those plans in Bluebeam so that they can compare to them when they're doing that digital review. So what that means is finding the paper plans. We have gotten some extra support from reproduction services at the city, where we're sending those projects over to reproduction services, and then they are scanning them. It's usually, I want to say a 72-hour turnaround to get those projects scanned, and then they can get uploaded into Bluebeam. But again, just pointing out that this process of identifying these projects, finding the permits, getting them over to reproduction services, getting them scanned, getting them uploaded into Bluebeam, and then bringing in the new plans into that session, and then inviting all the staff to review. It is a laborious process to do that, and I've been watching that with these priority projects in particular over time. So to the extent that we can get away from paper, finish off as many projects as possible in paper, and just be moving to the digital, and then bringing on these process improvements with the integrations and other things, and moving away from so much support staff and staff time on the administrative parts of this process, I think that's really where we're going to be in a very different place on this system overall as a whole moving forward. On ADUs, as I mentioned last time, and this is still the case, these are also kind of similar to fire permits, going to be going on their own track. So we are identifying them. Of these, there's been about 200 since April 8th, so both the pre-May 8th and the post-May 8th. And instead of having these go through the normal process, we're going to be asking the roundtable staff to actually do that QA and QC review at the beginning and moving those forwards on a faster clip, kind of similar to how they were doing roundtable review before. And then lastly, a need that came from a lot of interviews with customers and others is around the revisions. And a lot of you have pointed out that, you know, once revisions get submitted, especially in this new digital workflow, so all those 244 sessions, as we're finishing up those projects and customers are then ready to resubmit, not having them go kind of behind the queue of everything else that is new, and being able to get those revisions to the staff on a much faster pace. And so we did make adjustments to the digital forms on the post-May 8th so that we can find those and move them forward faster. And I just want to thank all the customers that pointed that out to us as we were going. And with that, I want to ask Iran, could you go ahead and just talk about, there were some changes to digital forms that were already made and some changes that are coming. That would be really helpful at this time.
Sure. Hi. So we did another small release this past Friday, the 22nd. So this was sort of an assorted bundle of about 16 enhancements or little bug fixes. None of them is a really headline news in and of itself, but they were all responsive to either customer feedback or staff feedback or things that we noticed that were a little wonky. So some of the things that we heard about the most from customers were the ability to indicate whether the application was for a site permit or a full permit. We have added that a checkbox and a question for that now. The staff asked for a checkbox to indicate whether the permit was to comply with a notice of violation or a complaint, because that really helps them in their processing. So you'll see that now. We added the Bluebeam project ID, and I really want to call that out. It is important for projects that are being reviewed digitally, which is most of them going forward, that if you are resubmitting plans due to plan check or comments, you put in the Bluebeam project ID and put it in accurately, because that will allow us to automatically send it to the right place, which obviously will help bring the processing time down. So do pay attention to that one. If you are asked for revisions to an electronically submitted job, you will be given your Bluebeam project ID. Please use it. Let's see what else. Oh, notes field. We had a lot of requests for a way to provide additional context and supporting information outside of the kind of pre-programmed questions. So you'll see that now. And then there were just like a bunch of other little stuff like the date formats for entering your professional license. We did away with the calendar picker, which was annoying. Now you can just enter the date. So stuff like that. We have another release scheduled for this coming Tuesday, and we turned our attention mostly to the addenda process and also clarifying the revisions versus resubmissions versus digital conversion. So we've gotten lots of feedback from staff along the way of what they were seeing from the very beginning of online submissions. And there was one category where there were some really consistent errors or missing documents, and that was addenda. And because that type of permit is so specific and has like very clear and explicit requirements, we've broken that out as its own permit flow so that we can ask for exactly what we know that staff need. And there is some additional supporting content on sf.gov right now, again, to help make it very, very clear how to have a complete and accurate application the first time. So that will help also bring processing time down and make staff's time more efficient. The other thing that we did was not a major change to the flow, but you'll see that there's still that third question on the main apply for a building permit page, and we've just made it a little clearer that that is where you apply for both revisions to previously issued permits, resubmissions of plans in response to comments, and then of course you can still upload plans for digital conversion. Once we release the next week's update, we are going to be turning our focus to really to the PTS integration. So you probably won't see major updates to the front end of the forms for the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Iran. And then as I already mentioned, the Bluebeam integration is possible now as of this week, and that's what we're going to really be turning to testing starting next week. And then I just wanted to note that I know DBI IT staff have been working really hard on bringing online payment for addenda, and that should be coming soon. So we went live for building permits a few weeks ago, and so they're seeking to, move and take all our permit payment forms digital as well. So I know building permits is a high volume one, so that is the one where they focus first, and now they're focusing on addenda. But I think this is another area where for staff, maybe they're getting a building permit as well as having to process another type of permit where the payment isn't digital. So they're having one permit you can pay for digitally, another you cannot. So again, these types of things, once we get it all digital, it really is going to help our support staff a lot and all the work they need to do to process these permits. So where we can use your help, because I know you guys have been so patient, and thank you so much. I asked last time that people please not CC me on email requests about permit status, and those emails went way down. So I just want to thank everyone for that, because it really does help me focus my time on both economic recovery and kind of overview of what's happening with permits and supporting all the staff and thinking big picture. So thank you for that. And here's a couple things that we thought about that we could really use some help from. So the first thing is we're seeing multiple submissions for the same project, and there's kind of two buckets there. So one is where we're seeing duplicates. And so I think that's where basically it's the same project and the same attachments, but they're just being submitted more than once. And maybe that's you submitted, but then you realize, oh, I made an error, and then you resubmitted. And to some of the extent, I understand that that can't be helped because, but to the extent that you're able to really review your project before you submit it and really make sure that it is complete and accurate and, you really read through all our requirements, it would save us a lot of time on that back and forth with customers on the front end. And then another thing that we're seeing is kind of multiple submissions for the same project. So for example, maybe you have one project and you do one submission for an addenda and then another submission for calcs, or like the documents kind of aren't all together, but they're submitted through different online clicks. And then when I talk about the volume, that's where I'm saying, like, if we can't take the volume that we've received and say this is the number of permits or projects because there are just so many duplicates coming in. So things you could do to help us is be sure the project is ready to submit and really following our guidance and all our requests. Like a lot of thought, as Iran just mentioned, is going into how we're setting up these digital forms on the front end and the guidance we're giving to customers to try to make it easier for the staff on the back end to try to help us speed up the process. So any and all things you can do there that would be really helpful. And then please do not resubmit projects because you don't see them in PTS yet. I yet could understand, why people would want to do that. Like, oh, did they get it? Let me try again. What if I didn't submit it? So if you got a confirmation email saying that you submitted, we did receive it. We do have it. I've also gotten a couple questions of like, can you post, a spreadsheet of all the things you've received? And we can do that. Again, it's just similar staff time right now, and like really trying to think strategically about staff time, but I am talking to digital services. So for example, to compare the May 8th to May 22nd and then the May 22nd onward projects that came in after the updates that were made, I had to actually combine the data from different spreadsheets and then I could pivot it. So they're working with me right now to figure out how can we streamline those reports so that all the data kind of pops out to me in one big report so that I can have a really good view of what's going on what's been submitted. And, I'm happy to provide that if that would really give people comfort. I guess my worry about that is it doesn't really tell you much more because you already gotten a confirmation email that said that you submitted. And until it gets actually entered into PTS or into Bluebeam, which is, I think, what everybody really wants to happen, nothing really has happened. We haven't lost it, but it just hasn't been entered yet. So that's something that we're thinking about to be responsive to that feedback. And we'll continue to talk to you guys about that and figure out what people would like us to do there. Certainly post May 8th, though, again, the data is much more easier to see what has come in. And then lastly, coordinating different applicants. So we've also noticed that we're getting sometimes for the same project submissions from different, like the consultants will submit or a homeowner will submit or a design professional, but all for the same project. So just making sure that you're all coordinating on the front end to make sure that whoever is submitting, it's just that one person and no one else is submitting for that same project. And then a new request this week, just because I'm explaining to you, a lot of this stuff isn't in PTS. And so especially on the post May 8th stuff, the same exact staff who are the intake and issuance staff who are processing these permits, who are getting the permits into Bluebeam, who are getting the permits into PTS, those are the same staff that are getting all of the email requests asking where the permits are at in the process. And it really is starting to, take them away from the thing that we know they need to be focusing on, even taking phone calls, like where's my permit at, like all of that stuff. It's totally understandable. And we understand that people really want to know what's going on. And that's why I'm trying to give you that high level update. Here's where things are at, so that hopefully people won't send all those individual specific emails to the staffs in the inboxes, because it's more work that we need to do to respond to those, and it takes staff away from actually doing the work to process and issue the permits, which is, I know, what everyone really wants us to be focusing on, and we also want to be focusing on. So a few other customer questions that I got that I just wanted to answer up front before we move into the Q&A. So why can't permits go right? Oh, you know what? I feel like I've already addressed this on why permits can't go right into PTS. So again, this is where integration is key, and we are going to be focusing on that very, very a lot of our time and effort in the coming weeks. How is over-the-counter determined? So I got a question about is it based on valuation? No, it's still based on scope of work. I think the confusion there was potentially with staff is prior to May 8th, because we didn't have all these very detailed questions on the form, we actually, as I mentioned, the permit center went, and some DBI staff helped as well. We had to go line by line to determine the scope of the work. And so we were using valuation as a proxy for that as we were trying to prioritize and sort those pre-May 8th permits. But that is not the way that we are determining over the counter. And moving forward post-May 8th, if you requested over the counter review, then a staffer is going to, a plan review staffer will look at those to determine, or a permit tech, or both. Right, as of right now, we actually had a plan reviewer go through and do that, just since all the support staff are working so hard on the issuance. And they went through and looked at every single one of those this week on the post-May 8th ones that we had received, and determined whether or not they were over the counter based on scope of work. When can customers review comments in Bluebeam? Starting Monday, we're going to start inviting customers into the sessions as the same time as staff moving forward. can we intake paper projects? So I know last time I mentioned, I was really hoping that we would have time to develop a process on this, but now that I'm seeing where we're at and what's going on, I just don't think that my answer is now not at this time. So first of all, this would increase exposure and pose health risks, as well as taking away the staff from implementing the digital. We do have some staff working on finishing off the paper right now, but really the vast majority of the staff, we need them to be focusing on the digital so that the system continue to get off the ground and become more efficient. And the more things that we take in on paper, it's the same staff, right? It's the same staff who are answering the emails, who are doing the intake. So there's only so many of them, and we really want to be efficient about how we're using those staff. And then this question I got a lot too last time about Bluebeam. Rebecca, can I ask you to answer this question about use of Bluebeam and cost of Bluebeam?
Yep, no problem. So there are multiple ways to approach Bluebeam from the customer perspective, and there are 2 free options out there that we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. So if you download the trial version of Bluebeam, once the trial ends, you can continue to use it in the view mode, and that'll enable you to participate in studio sessions and see documents. And then there's also, there's also an iPad view application. And similarly, if you download that, you can participate in studio sessions, review comments, and both of those have some limited functionality within them as well. So you can do measurements and participate within our process. Everything that you need to do with us, you can do in these 2 free versions of the product.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, then I just have 2 more slides. So just kind of summarizing the current state. So as you guys, I know I mentioned at the beginning, so we can't reopen, and we're really in these unprecedented times. And we've accomplished a lot in the last 2 months. And in particular, the way I think about it is we've really laid the foundation for this entire system. And as I mentioned, we had always planned on kind of going slow and steady, and we did not want to disrupt the over-the-counter process. Like, it is such an efficient process the way that it was working in person. But as a result of COVID and really the situation right now, we do need to entirely and are turning our focus to getting that system going back to a degree that you guys can expect that is faster. And we understand what an impact it's having that it is not there right now, especially on those projects, because you're so used to them being so fast and being able to take care of them. So, the system and the foundation is being laid. We think we have a workflow now. We have staff trained on that workflow. We're seeing things moving through. As I mentioned, those 244 sessions that are open and being worked right now by staff and customers. And we're really just going to continue to work on addressing these needs. So something we've been really trying to do is be dynamic. So as we're having more information about what is and isn't working, we're shifting our staff. We're thinking about how to put people on different topic areas. We're changing our forms. Like, we're really trying to adapt to meet the needs as we know them at the time that we know them. And the last thing I'll say on that is, I am there. I am watching. The staff are working so hard to make this successful. And staff are actually, a lot of the staff at 1660 are coming in because they have better equipment on site. They don't have as much equipment at home. And so there are a lot of staff that aren't teleworking, that are, taking public transit and coming in right now and just working so incredibly hard in the middle of this health pandemic. So any of them that are on the call, I want to say thank you. And looking forward, so we're going to be continuing refining this process as we learn and we watch and we see how everything is working, and we're going to continue to change and adapt. But as I mentioned multiple times on this call, from what I can see, we need further technological improvements before we're going to get back to those pre-COVID-19 timeframes. And so that is where I'm going to be focusing all of my efforts now in the coming weeks with the staff. And we'll be continuing to hold these customer updates every 2 weeks, and we'll be giving you all the information, the latest information, as soon as we have it. And I just want to thank everyone for all of your patience and how kind and understanding you've been, and just appreciate you and all your feedback that you've given to help us make the process better and all the changes that we've made as a result of your feedback. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions and answers for all those that are on the call. Christine, could you help us switch into that mode?
Yep, I just opened it up. So if you are watching this online, there's a little logo icon on the floating menu bar, or in the top right corner of your screen. It's a little question mark with 2 conversation kind of bubbles. If you click on that, it'll open up a sidebar where you can ask a question. Now it looks like they're flowing in.
Great, thanks, Christine. Okay, I see a few questions coming in. Okay. Hello. My plans have been in process for months, and all the staff and plan checkers have been wonderful to deal with, except for one. Is it possible to request another plan checker? I'm basically not responsive or not hearing things. So this is an area where I do think you should be emailing me. If you're having in particular, an issue with a specific staff or a specific department, I'm happy to help you troubleshoot that. So I would go ahead and email me, anonymous person who has said that, and then we can loop in the correct managers to figure out what's going on there. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Question that I'm sure a lot of you are asking. So I submitted something on May 12th. So far, I've heard nothing. When should I expect to have a response? So any rough timeline? So this is where I'm saying it depends on the scope of work. If it's an over-the-counter, this is where we're going to be turning to those starting next week and getting those into PTS and into Bluebeam. So my hope is that by next week, we're going to start seeing a lot of those over-the-counter with plans moving into PTS and moving into Bluebeam. And then once they're in Bluebeam, you'll be able to start monitoring who is and who is not working on them. This is going to be one for Iran or Christine. Is the 3x2 tall stamping space a permanent requirement? Can it be 3x2 wide? We have a 2 wide title block, so should we change it to 3 wide permanently? This will reduce our drawing space and changes to all of our existing drawings. Are either of you able to answer the? I know that a lot of thought went into.
I'll go ahead and take that. Thank you. The 3x2 space is to accommodate the DBI director's stamp on every page. That is the final stamp of approval, and so we do need it to be 3x2 everywhere. So sorry about that.
Thanks, Iran. Can there be a quick function added to withdraw an incorrect submission? This is a great question. We've been talking about this over the last few days. We really do need that. It doesn't exist right now, but we are absolutely going to start talking to digital services about how could we do that, because that would help us a lot. I don't know, Iran, is there anything else you want to add on that?
I'm curious if like this was, when they say quick function, they mean like in the moment of submission, they realize, oh no, I forgot this or that was wrong, because that's like a different case than coming back after the fact, probably. But I will talk about both.
That's a good point.
With the team.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a permit application that we resubmitted digitally in early May. The tracking system shows electronically submitted needs to be reconciled by the permit center. Is this an indicator something is wrong or needs to be addressed by us? What kind of new comments or coding should we expect with this new processing system? And Christine, I believe this is one of those ones that needs to go to repro for scanning. Is that correct?
Correct. So this would be a project that had come in with, and we know that there is a paper set living somewhere either at DBI or another permitting office. And so plan checkers would need to review that paper set compared to the new electronic set, and we're going through the process of scanning that set. So when you see something that says needs to be reconciled by permit center, it means we are scanning it.
Great. So in the answer to your question, do you need to do anything? The answer is you don't need to do anything for right now. But that process is, as I mentioned, like it's time intensive to find those, to get them to repro, to get them scanned, and to get them in. But I think the fact that you see that comment means the team is aware of it and they're working on it. Next question, will turnaround times on minor administrative requests be improving? Example, a couple add contractor to permit requests were submitted, sent May 14th. 2 weeks seems excessive for something so small. Are emails being responded in the order received, or is there a triage system set up to efficiently filter requests by type and scope as they come in? Yeah, so this is a great question. So this is definitely where I'm saying pre-May 8th, we did, but it was a very time-intensive process to go through all of those, and you know, like it wasn't working well. And so that's why post-May 8th, yes, that's why we started asking all these questions on the front end, and that's where I'm saying yes, we are now being way more efficient about post-May 8th, how we're tying staff to those different project types. So for example, on the support staff, we have some support staff that are really working right now on the ADUs and the priority projects, whereas different support staff are working on the no plans permits and the over-the-counter permits. And those are just a couple of examples. And, you know, again, we're going to be turning to the over-the-counter with plans permits next week. And I agree with, if that's what you're asking about on this request, we really want to figure out how can we get those out the door much quicker and get back to those faster timelines. And yes, we are looking at those and figuring out how to make them quicker. But I do think that PTS integration and some of these technological improvements are really going to be needed. And the reason is just the volume, right? The volume of these permits coming in is very high. And so the amount of manual typing in and other things is really the barrier there. So staff are doing that work and we are bifurcating it, but I just really think we need this technological improvements to see the kind of turnaround times that I believe customers and all of us would like to have. Is the Bluebeam ID only used to identify revision submittals? What other use is there for the Bluebeam IDs? Christine, could you take that one?
Yeah, so it's definitely important to know your Bluebeam project ID when you're resubmitting revisions. And in the email that staff uses to contact you to ask you to resubmit, it'll be indicated on that email. But generally, also, anytime we create a session where plan checkers are going to start reviewing, that will have an ID. And so for I think as a customer, it would just be helpful to know that, that number exists.
Thanks, Christine. Next question is, will customers be invited into Bluebeam as soon as staff on intake permits as well as over the counter? I believe the answer to that is yes, but I just would love for Iran or Christine to confirm 100%.
That hasn't come up yet with the plan checkers for intake, but we can explore what that means and then the steps and then take the steps.
Okay, thank you. So just to confirm then, so for over the counter, the answer is definitely yes. For intake, I think people want to think strategically still about what is the right point to invite in a customer into that workflow. Is that correct, Christine?
Correct. Yeah, and mostly for the ask for OTC was coming a lot from both the customers and also the plan checkers when they have questions that they feel that can be resolved really on the spot. They wanted a way for the applicant to be in the session and also for them to call or email that applicant quickly to kind of resolve that question.
Yeah, and actually, since you bring that up, I don't know, Iran or Christine, if one of you, could you just talk for a couple minutes about that? Because I know departments have already restarted up having over-the-counter schedules across the board. And so like scheduling people again when they're working over the counter, I believe that started 2 weeks ago for both planning and DBI. Is there anything else you'd want to add for customers about that kind of live interaction? Because I know you guys have been talking about that a lot, the desire for that.
I'll take that. This is Iran.
You might be muted. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we have talked about it because, everyone recognizes that opportunity for real-time interaction is part of what made the old over-the-counter process so efficient. We are fairly early on the curve with this, so we want to try it out for a couple weeks with the process as described, and really give everyone a chance in the departments and also customers to kind of get their feet under them with this process. That's part of where inviting customers in at the beginning comes in, because if you are sort of hanging out doing your work anyway and you have a tab open or Bluebeam open and someone is making comments, a plan checker is making comments in real time, my understanding is that you can go in there and reply, right? So I also understand that many plan checkers would just as soon pick up the phone and call somebody and get a question answered. So I would encourage folks to be available for that. You'll get that invitation to the session. And so just kind of keep an eye on your phone, keep an eye on Bluebeam. Like, to start with, these are things that will increase opportunities for real-time interaction. And as we see how that is working, we've talked about bringing back something more structured, perhaps using our queuing system on the web to facilitate a phone call or some other type of in-person interaction.
And I would add immediately, we are going to be sending out emails for all the customers that have OTC sessions created already to invite you into those sessions so that you can join in and see comments, and then plan checkers will have the contact information to be able to contact customers in case there are small questions that they feel can be resolved fairly quickly.
Great. How do we identify the permit is processed and ready for review once a Bluebeam ID is assigned, permit application number, Bluebeam session, etc.? So I believe that once you get invited into the session, but I would also like for Iran or Christine to confirm.
Okay, so
they're asking, when is it ready for review? Like when are plan reviewers, like it's past support staff?
Yeah, so once, so the best way to see that would be to log into DBI's website and look it up in PTS. And when you see the routings, there will be different routing departments and disciplines. And when there are arrive dates for all those departments, that is the date that they've been sent a session to begin their plan review. So it's the dates in the arrive column.
Thank you. I submitted an ADU revision April 8th per issued comments, and I was just asked to resubmit to make it easier in the process. I was not allocated a Bluebeam ID. How are we fast track and flagging these? First, I apologize to this customer, but I think that does make sense. Again, this is because we were made aware by a lot of you that revisions, weren't being pulled out. We really needed to pull them out so we could get them through faster, because those are things that are already like at a much later point in the process. I believe there are now customer questions up on the front, and they'll help us identifying these revisions, and the permit center team is helping identify those and getting those through to the plan checkers faster. Correct, Iran?
We hope so.
You might be muted.
No. So we aren't doing much to that flow next week. We're clarifying the question that gets you in, and also pulling out addenda will help clarify, and we'll give that flow more attention in the coming months.
I would add, because that one is an ADU, and Melissa explained that we're bringing ADU roundtable staff into sessions to do that work. So that one would be taken into that separate path.
Okay, great. How can I contact a plan checker? It's so difficult to get them into a session. So this one I'd like to understand, are your permits in the session and you are in the session? But if that's the question, then I would like to understand who the plan reviewer is. And then I think we can reach out to that plan reviewer and talk about that with the customer. So that's the way I'm reading that question. So I think this is another one where it'd actually be great for this customer. They've been invited into a session. They can see that the plan reviewer is in the session, but they need to have a conversation with that plan reviewer to address their comments. We would love to help facilitate that. So if you could point that out to me or to Patrick or to even James Zahn, who I see is on the call, we're happy to help with that.
Just to follow up on that one, Melissa, this is Cheryl from DBI.
Yeah. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. So when a project is in a session, that means that a project's ready to be reviewed. But the question is, what is the plan reviewer's backlog, and how many projects do you have prior to that? So just because it's in a session doesn't mean there's a huge backlog of projects that, it's not that staff is going to immediately hop on this project because there's a session open. So once a session is created, basically it's assigned, and then when it's assigned, there's a session ID number for the plan reviewer to go into review. So it might be still maybe, a couple of days or even weeks, depending on, the plan checker's backlog of projects to hop in there to review.
Well, and I think, Cyril, this question is more about these over-the-counter. I'm reading this as though it's an over-the-counter permit. Staffers are having over-the-counter sessions now. So if they're going to be in a session, like how can the person know, kind of like they used to in person? So if that was the question, I do hear that question. I think we can help address that question. Okay. Let's see, we're at 11:58, so we have time for a couple. I'll do a couple more. Christine, this one is probably going to be for you. Can you please address how the integrity of plans will be maintained from initial submittal to after permit issuance? What security procedures will be implemented to prevent the alteration of documents, including the copying or other misuse of design professional stamps and signatures? Could you talk about that a little bit in the functionality on Bluebeam there?
Yeah, well, our intention for Bluebeam use is to only invite the applicant in, and only those that the applicant wants into those sessions, and then to only share the documents with that applicant and the people that are, have been invited into that session. So whether that be the contractor or the agent or the owner, we are working through, permission. We are locking down permissions such that other folks can't enter into sessions or the project and be able to download and reuse those drawings. So we are cognizant of the security and thinking through all those different scenarios and what could happen.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then the final question is, can you please provide guidelines for what is considered over the counter? I think, Cyril, that might be a great one for you to take. And then I know Liz Waddy is on the call too. Could you guys both comment on that, please?
Sure. So for planning, I'll jump in for planning. Nothing has changed in terms of the definition of over the counter. We're just in a new universe of how we're addressing this. So for planning, over the counter typically means that it doesn't otherwise require a public hearing and it doesn't require neighborhood notification. There are a few exceptions to that, but that's the general rule of thumb that we use for processing over the counter. In addition to, normally it's a 15-minute turnaround in person, but I would say right now we're being more flexible on the time frame and more focused on not needing any subsequent public process.
And this is Cyril from DBI, and all the projects that's come in from the permit center to DBI, basically it's screened. It's based on the type of construction, cost evaluation, and the scope of work. Majority of the projects that actually have came into DBI basically has been opened in Bluebeam just to review the construction documents and submittal forms or whatnot, just to filter out what can be done and what can't be done over the counter. So we do screen them for the scope of work.
Great, thanks, Cyril. And yeah, I guess
Hi,
the initial comment would be
James.
nothing is. Oh, hi, go ahead, James.
Hi, I have a message for a customer. I have been screening the priority project, and I have noticed that lots of our customers have claimed that their projects are priority, while in fact they are not. I know the online submittal questionnaire have questions asking if your project is 100% affordable. By that, I want to clarify that it meant to be asking you that whether or not your project is a new construction, 100% affordable new construction housing project. If it's not, please do not indicate that it is such. And also the second questionnaire for the priority project is the development agreement project. That is a very specific term. I see a lot of, I have encountered quite a few of like kitchen remodeling, adding lights in the bathroom, and replacement roof, claiming that they are priority. They are claiming both 100% and also development agreement project. By doing so, will not expedite your permitting process. It will only add to the confusion on the permit center's staff and DBI's staff confusion. So that is not productive. So please do not claim that your project as such if they are not.
James.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. And I think this is like another great example of where, I'm sure people aren't clear of what those definitions are. And so we need to do a better job on the front end on the forms of really defining what these things are so that it's really clear for people as they're selecting. So that's great feedback. Thank you for doing the review of those projects, and we'll be sure to continue changing these form questions as we go to make sure that we're going to get better and better over time at doing all of this. This is new for all of us, and we're learning a ton as we go. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone. We are going to continue doing these every 2 weeks, telling you all the information we know at that time. And you can continue to reach out as you've been doing if you have specific questions for me or for others. And we just really thank everyone for all of your patience, and take care.